to remove suffering, and it is with the help of Pratityasamutpada. And Nagarjuna's philosophizing also stays chiefly about Pratityasamutpada. That is, it stays as a kind of Pratityasamutpada itself. It is a kind of activity rather than providing a theory. And because he is a Mahayanist, he is not only walking the road when he is teaching, but he is also taking the others towards the end of suffering. And it is because of this reason that his teaching remains a critic of any inclination towards any position, because it has to be Pratityasamutpada. It's a constant admonishing when there is a deviating from the middle path. This very feature of positionlessness that Nagarjuna advocates denies length to the middle path. Positionlessness cannot have reference to distance to be covered. And in fact, we do find that the path Nagarjuna advocates, claiming to be taught by the Buddha, doesn't require one to progress towards freedom. Wisdom doesn't happen in stages. It happens, and there is the end to suffering. For Nagarjuna, dependent origination is the middle path. And there is the famous Karika, where he says that we state that whatever is dependent arising, that is emptiness. That is dependent upon convention. That itself is middle path. Now, when we look into this statement, we find two more things. First, middle path is non-different from the goal of emptiness. And second, it is taught through convention. In fact, if we go to the Madhyamaka Karika, we will find that in the very dedicatory verse, Nagarjuna declares to be the very teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha is said to have taught non-ceasing, non-arising, non-annihilation, non-permanence, non-identity, non-difference, non-appearance, non-disappearance, and Pratityasamutpada. Nagarjuna thus seems to be doing more than paying homage to the Buddha. He's proposing, on one hand, that for the Buddha, dependent arising is not different from non-ceasing and non-arising. And on the other hand, what the Buddha teaches is not definable, and that is why it is a true negation. Moreover, through his pointing out that the Buddha teaches true negations, he demonstrates the importance of that which is negated. Now, we will find, if we go into his teachings, that he doesn't make any difference between the reality, or what he calls the reality, and the dependence. About the reality, he says it is non-dependent, peaceful, unobsessed by obsession, without any discrimination, and variety of meaning. And similarly, we do find him saying about dependence. Whatever happens depending upon whatever, that can be said to be neither identical nor different. Therefore, it is neither annihilated nor eternal. And it is also without variety of meaning or with one single meaning. So again, it is neither annihilation nor eternal. In other words, they are claimed to be non-different by Nagarjuna. Now again, he says that Buddha teaches two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, or ultimate truth. Now when we look into it, that he teaches through the two truths, we find that dependent origination becomes the convention, and emptiness is the ultimate fruit, and that without a dependent origination, emptiness cannot be understood. And without understanding emptiness, there is no chance of understanding freedom. This is what he says. And if we go into his argument, it appears that whatever is dependent is not an entity. And everything that we have in hand, or whatever there is that we perceive or we do see, is nothing but dependent. And this dependent is what he calls as empty. And this empty directs us to emptiness. And if we go into Nagarjuna's teachings, we find one thing. That is, he teaches either through empirical, either through an empirical way or through the conceptions. That is, he teaches us what is a dependent by showing it in fact and by showing in our thought. And here we get a glimpse of what he considers as dependent, that which cannot be found as a separate or which is always found together, in fact, is a dependent, and whatever cannot be separated in our thought and whatever we think together is called dependent. Now let us see what are the things or what it is that he calls as dependent. The very first chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika says that whatever is we call as a condition, these conditions are called conditions because they are found with results. If that doesn't follow, that is, if there is no origination of the result, then are we still supposed to call them as conditions? Don't they become non-condition? And then he says that whenever we find result, then only we do find that there are the conditions. Otherwise, we do not. In other words, the result and the conditions are always found together in fact. And then he takes recourse to Buddha's teaching. Depending on this, the other arises. He says that Buddha's this teaching doesn't apply to discrete entities. And it does apply to conditions and result. And we have seen that they are the dependents. And if they are the dependents and this teaching applies to them and Buddha's teaching doesn't apply to the discrete, then automatically we come to the conclusion that dependents are not discrete. So he begins like that. And then he says, similarly, regarding that we do not find certain things in our experience without each other. He takes the example of lust and the lustful. He says that the lust and the lustful can be found only when they are together. They cannot be found apart. And that is why he says we are not supposed to consider them as discrete. Lust and lustful are always found together. Then he talks about what are the things that we find in our thoughts as inseparable. And again, he says that they are the dependents because we cannot separate them even conceptually. He begins in his third chapter by saying what is a seer. He says that we can understand a seer only with a reference to seeing. If there is no seeing, then we do not understand a seer. And in a similar manner, a seeing can be understood only with reference to the object of seeing and the organ of seeing. Now, if they are always found together in our thoughts, not in experience, but in thoughts we cannot separate the seer from seeing, and we cannot separate the seeing from the object of seeing and the organ of seeing, then we cannot consider them as a discrete. This is what he tries to convey to us. And he says that if we actually do not find a seer without the seeing, then how do we say that there is a seeing and there is also an object of seeing? In other words, he is trying to say that there is nothing called seer in the sense of a discrete entity. Then he also explains in chapter 8 that there is no agent and an action independent of one another. We cannot think of an agent without an action, and we cannot think of an action without an agent. And if they cannot be put apart in our thoughts, then are we supposed to consider them as discrete? So he says that they are not to be considered as discrete. And he not only starts off with the agent and action, he says that this is to be extended to all whatever we consider as entities. And to quote him, following this method of rejection of agent and action, one should understand grasping the remaining existence should be critically examined in the terms of concepts of action and agents. So in other words, we do not have a discrete entity called an agent, and we do not have another entity called an action. And in a similar way, he also talks about someone and something. He says that someone, we can have the knowledge of someone only in relation to something, and we can know about something only in relation to someone. And if we can have a knowledge of someone only in relation to something, we are not supposed to consider the someone as a discrete entity. Similarly, if we are considering that something can be known only in relation to someone, then something cannot be considered as a discrete entity. In other words, he's denying that there is a self independent of something, and there is something that is an object independent of the self, that they are not discrete. They're not to be considered as a discrete entity. And he also quotes a Buddha here by saying that the one who doesn't understand that there is anything or any entity called the self, then he doesn't understand Buddha. So here and now we do find Nagarjuna making reference to Buddha and suggesting to us that what he is saying is actually what the Buddha taught. Now let us go to the third way of rejecting entities. The first one we saw is that he rejected those to be entities, or what we say is discrete entities, on the ground that certain things are found only together, lustful, and probably I missed out aggregate and the cause of the aggregate, and then the condition and the result. Then he said that those are also not to be considered as a discrete, which are always conceptually together. That is, we cannot think of them apart. Say, for example, the seer and the seeing and the object of seeing and the organ of seeing. And then we also had, what was it? I forgot, but anyway, that there are certain things that we cannot think of them as apart. And if we cannot think of them as apart, they are not to be considered as discrete. Now I remember agent and action. That is, these are things that we cannot, agent cannot be considered independently of the action, and I cannot think of an action independent of the agent. So they are not to be considered as discrete entities. This is what Nagarjuna is trying to convey. Now he also denies those as entities or those as discrete entities, which we believe to be there as discrete entities. And if we analyze, we will find that we believe them to be so on the ground of what he has already shown as dependence. Now let us see what are the things that he has denied as discrete entity, because they themselves are dependent on the dependence. Say if action is a dependent, and if we are basing our belief of something on this action, then Nagarjuna will deny that the thing which is dependent on action will also be an entity. So first he says that existence and non-existence are not to be believed. He says that the person who sees existence and non-existence are not perceiving properly. This is exactly what he says. So why does he say that there is no existence of existence and non-existence? Because existence and non-existence, we believe them to be there because we believe that there is an existent and there is a non-existent. So if this is the case, then if he proves that there is no existent and non-existent, then we are not supposed to believe in existence and non-existence. And this he does with the help of, again, showing that there is no characteristic and the characterized. He says that there is no characteristic because we cannot logically if we really go into it, we cannot attribute characteristic to the characterized. For example, should we say the characteristic belongs to the characterized? Then was there a characterized before the characteristic? Or are we going to say that the characterized is there after the attribution of the characteristic? That is, we cannot understand the characterized without the characteristic. So in other words, characteristic and the characterized cannot be thought apart. And if they cannot be thought apart, the very existent, what we call as existent, and that existent we understand only as being characterized or being as characterized or not characterized, then these existents are also not there. And if existent are not there, then we are not supposed even to believe that there are existence and a non-existence. So next he says that this is about the third category of what he doesn't consider to be entities, that is those which are dependent on the dependence. And now he says that there is no birth process. That is what we call as samsara, is not there. And why it is not there? He says that the birth process, when we understand it, we always understand it only with reference to a beginning, with a middle, and with an end. That is, there has to be three processes of the birth process. Now, if we understand it that way, now how are we going to understand the beginning, the middle, and the end? That is, can there be a beginning without an end? Can there be a middle without the end? Or can there be an end in the middle without the beginning? No. In other words, the beginning, the middle, and the end cannot be thought without each other. In other words, again, Nagarjuna is saying that the beginning, the middle, and the end can be understood only dependently. In other words, they are not discrete. If they are not discrete, then are we supposed to believe in the birth process, which involves these three stages of the beginning, of the middle, and the end? So he says that birth process is not something which we can call as discrete. Then he goes to deny that there can be association of the dependence. Actually, his argument is that there are no dependents as a discrete entity. And if the discrete entities are not there, then what is it that we are talking about when we talk about association? Because association is always of the discrete entities, so they are not there. And he actually denies it by denying first a difference and then by denying identity. He says that we do not find a difference either in one entity or in between the entities which we are differentiating. So now if the difference is not there, then of course even the question of identity will not be there. And if difference and identity is not there, then there are no discrete entities as such. And if there are no discrete entities, then whose association are we talking about? And in fact, Nagarjuna says that we get involved in some kind of absurdity when we consider association as something to be real, as something to be really there. He says that when we try to make these discrete entities associated, we cannot do it. That is, we cannot establish their distinctness. And when we cannot establish something, this discreteness or let us say discriminated status, what we do is we invent a concept of coexistence. And now when we invent this concept of coexistence, he says that how do we establish this coexistence? Coexistence can be established again only when we prove what we started with. That is, only when we prove that they are discrete. So we end up in a kind of a circular argument if we consider the dependence to be really discrete entities. That was the third kind of things or the entities that Nagarjuna's denied. Now there is a fourth kind of things, if we can call it things at all, that Nagarjuna has denied. Nagarjuna says that if something cannot be thought, something is self-contradictory, then that cannot be accepted as a discrete entity. And anything that is based, or anything which conception is based on such a self-contradicted notion, then even that cannot be considered as a discrete. He actually wants to prove that there are no existence. And then he starts by saying that, can we think about self-nature? Because we say that an existent is an existent because it has got self-nature. Now he questions us, that is, what do we understand by self-nature? Is it produced? If it is produced, it is not self-nature. And if it is not produced, then if it is not produced and if it is not made, if it is unmade, then why are we associating the self-nature with something self-nature? So if it is by itself, then it should have existed by itself. But we are saying the self-nature of something. So if it is unmade, then why are we associating with a thing? So in other words, he is trying to convey to us that the self-nature is something which cannot be actually thought of. Now, if self-nature is not thought of, now, can we think about an existent? So he says that there are no existent. Next, he says that we cannot think about time. Now, why can't we think about time? Now, there are three arguments, it seems, that he provides to negate time. The first one, he says that whenever we think about time, time is with duration. That is what is called time. And that is what he refers to, that is kala. That is, when we think about kala or time, it is the past, the present, and the future. But can we understand the present with a reference to the past? Or can we understand the future with a reference to the past? We cannot. So in other words, the present and the future can be understood only with a reference to the past. And if they can be understood only with reference to the past, then they are not there as a discrete. And if they are not there as a discrete, then what do we call the present and the past? And if they are not there, do we really have a duration? And if we don't have a duration, then do we have time? And second, he says about finding it in fact. That is, do we experience a static time? We don't. Do we really experience a time which is not static? He says we don't. So why do we then accept that there is time? The third argument he provides is that time can be thought only with a reference to an existent, that this entity has crossed through past and crossed through, probably is in the present, and will cross through the present and will be in the future. In other words, we can think about time maybe in reference to existent, but there are no existence. That is what he has been trying to say. And if there are no existence, are we supposed to consider that there is time? He said that there is no time. And on a similar ground, he also said that there is no samsara and there is no nirvana. And samsara, he has in a way said that there is no birth process. And freedom also is not there in the sense of a distinct entity, because we cannot think of freedom without reference to the birth process. And not only that, he says that there is no distinction between the birth process and freedom. He removes the distinction between samsara and nirvana. So to distinguish between one and the other, they have to be there. But life process is not there as a distinct entity. And freedom is not there as a distinct entity because we can think of freedom only in relation to birth. So if they are not there, then can we think of them as being really there? And if it's not there, we cannot even think of the distinction. He actually gives the argument that we cannot attribute continuity and the cessation to dispositions, and we also cannot attribute it to our sentient being. And if we cannot do that, we cannot actually say that there is freedom, and we cannot say that there is samsara. And if they are not there, we also cannot distinguish between birth process and freedom. So there is no distinction. Now, let me just come to it that why actually Shankara keeps on trying to say that there are no things. He tries to say that there are no things because according to him, if we believe that there are things, views originate, and when we have views, from it originates suffering. We'll come to it later, but beyond these four arguments, he also sometimes quotes scripture. I will call it scripture because he quotes actually Buddha. He says that there are certain things which have been denied even by the Buddha. One thing that has been said by Nagarjuna to be denied by Buddha is karma, action. And he also explains what he understands by action. That is not only action by Nagarjuna, but what is understood as action in Buddhism. Action is the will or the volition. And again, the action that follows from the volition is action. And he quotes Buddha as a saying that action is imperishable. And now he interprets imperishability by saying that action doesn't arise, that is why it doesn't cease, and therefore action has been called as imperishable by the Buddha. So it is a scriptural ground on which actually he has denied that there is an action. And not only action, now he denies anything that follows action. And to argue that, he says that if we deny the seed, if there is no seed, then there is no sprout and anything that follows from the sprout. Similarly, if action is disproved, that is, if action is proved as not being there, then everything that follows from action will be also disproved. So he takes a recourse to scripture, denies action and everything that follows from action. And as I said, now, what is it that is with us then? That is, okay, there are no things, there are no entities, then we do have something. We do have let us say, the aggregates, the cause. We do have the action and agent. We have the condition and the result. Now, what is it that we have? Now, Nagarjuna calls that this is empty. So in other words, what do we have, which is not a distinct entity, but if we still do have in our hand and we hold on to it, this is what Nagarjuna calls as empty. And to understand what is empty, he of course talks about emptiness, but at the same time, emptiness is something that we cannot talk about. It appears that he indicates what is an emptiness, and then he comes to what is empty. Being that, let us say that he says that it is change, to quote him, because of perception of change, existence, no self-natureness is recognized. I have translated it as no self-natureness, which is called in Sanskrit as nishvabhavatvam. So it is not even nishvabhava, it is said nishvabhavatva. So nishvabhava, I have said it is to be non-self-natureness. So because of the perception of change, then there is no self-natureness. And then he goes to say that emptiness of existence, there is no existence. So he doesn't say no self-natureness is emptiness. He moves from no self-natureness to emptiness. But he does say one thing about emptiness, again with a reference to change only, that it doesn't belong to a thing. So I have argued it by saying that because of change, there is a recognition of no self-natureness. And whatever it indicates is emptiness. And this emptiness, we cannot consider it to belong to a thing or belong to an entity, because he says that a change doesn't belong to an entity. Now, he gives the example that if we consider that change occurs in milk, and then there is the butterness, then he says that if the change is occurring in the entity, then milk itself will become the butter. And if milk is the butter, then are we supposed to say that there is something called butterness? So there is a rejection that emptiness belongs to a thing. And we will see why he actually talks about it. But that is something he himself hasn't mentioned, but it appears to be like that. And about empty, he says that empty is not something which is a thing turned into empty. That is, it's not something changed into. He doesn't say that empty, that there is a thing which turns into empty. He denies it. And to quote him, if there were to be something non-empty, there also would have been something empty. However, anything non-empty is not. How will there be empty? So he is denying that empty is something changed product. It's not. Rather, it appears, but from whatever he says, that empty is all that we have. Because he does say that dependent is all that we have. Now, let us go back to the issue which I mentioned, that why Nagarjuna talks so much about dependence not being entity, then that which whatever we have as a dependence is not an entity, and he says that it is empty. Now, why does he talk so much about it? He talks about it because, as I said, that is, whenever we have a thing, then only we can have a view. And view is the source of ignorance, and we know that ignorance is the beginning of suffering. And on the other hand, then what should we do to end this suffering? Now, Nagarjuna says that we have to have an understanding of emptiness. And this emptiness is directed only by what is empty. So that is why empty becomes so important, and that is why dependent origination becomes so important for Nagarjuna. Now he says that, what I said is that, that only when we believe that there is a thing, that there is the view. So let me quote him, he says, exist implies a grasping after eternalism. Does not exist implies a philosophy of annihilation. Therefore, a discerning person should not rely upon either existence or non-existence. Whatever that is in terms of self-nature, that is non-existent, implies eternalism. It doesn't exist now, but existed before implies annihilation. In other words, he is showing to us that it is only a belief in a thing that can lead to a view. But there is also the Buddhism, so that is the Abhidharma Buddhism, which considers that we do not have to believe in eternalism and annihilationism just because we believe in an existent. They believe in becoming. And Nagarjuna now denies that there can be a becoming. And his denial is based on his denial of time, because becoming has to be in time. And he has already denied time. So he says that becoming is not an option. That is, the view of becoming is not an option. And he in fact tells us, and this actually happens in the second chapter itself, that that we end up in a kind of absurdity if we start believing in certain things. That is, he gives the example of motion and the mover. That is, movement, motion, and mover. That is, if we really believe that there is something called a motion or a movement apart from the mover, then we will be saying that there is a mover without a movement, because how will we be ascribing movement to whom? If there is something which is not a mover, then there is a mover without a, then there is something without a movement, then what is a mover? So he is saying that we end up in absurdity if we hold a view about the thing. And he also denies that we can have views of causality. As we all know, Nagarjuna gives us 4 views of causality. And in fact, we in Indian tradition do have 4 views. And Nagarjuna is saying that we cannot have views about causality. And his reason for denying that is that we cannot have views of causality because causality itself is not an entity. And why causality is not an entity? He says that we cannot have an effect because it is a kind of self-contradictory notion. Because if we say, and so how if the effect is there without the cause, then what is the cause? And if the effect is always with the cause, then can we think of them as apart? So if we do not have effect as a distinct entity, then we do not have cause as a distinct entity, then we do not have causality as a distinct entity. And if we do not have causality or distinct entity, are we supposed to have views about causality? So he actually says that we are not supposed to have views about the things which we think as things. And I have found that Nagarjuna calls this having views itself is a perversion. Generally in early Buddhism or in Abhidharma Buddhism, having a wrong view is a perversion. But Nagarjuna is trying to tell us that having view itself is a perversion. He says that generally what is considered is that belief in permanence or belief in a permanent thing is perversion. And he says that isn't viewing that the empty is impermanent is perversion. That is, we have to hold on to empty as a thing to have a view of the empty and say that it is impermanent. So he says that having view itself is impermanent. And as I have been saying that according to Nagarjuna, this having view itself is considered to be the source. And let me quote him, because he will say that with the end of perversion or end of views, there is also going to be end of suffering. To quote him, with the cessation of perversion, ignorance ceases. When ignorance has ceased, the dispositions, etc., comes to cease. And that he considers that the view itself is a perversion. Let me quote him. If grasping onto the view, what is impermanent is permanent is perversion, how is it that even after grasping after the view, what is empty is permanent doesn't constitute a perversion? In other words, he considers that having view is a perversion and ending view is going to end our suffering, because it is going to end everything that follows from perversion. Now we have been, or Nagarjuna has been arguing that if we come to emptiness, then there is not going to be any perversion, or there is not going to be any view. And in fact, he says that there is no view, and just let me quote him. How can the tetralama of eternal, non-eternal be in the peaceful? How can the tetralama of the finite, infinite, etc. be peaceful? So in other words, in the peaceful, there is no view. And he says that it is only the people with a little intelligence who thinks that there are existent. And for those who think that there are entities, entities actually cannot end. Then what are we supposed to think? We are supposed to believe that whatever we have in hand, as he has been trying to show to us, true dependent origination is an empty. So this is what is the job of an empty. And in fact, he says so. That is, the empty, or whatever we have in hand, actually does communicate to us what is actually there. So their job is to communicate, that is all. Their job, we are not supposed to think of them as things. We are supposed to consider them as serving the purpose of communicating to us as something else. And let us say, I like this karika very much. Empty, non-empty, both or neither. This should not be declared. It is expressed only for the purpose of communication. So whatever is given to us, whatever we have in hand, is only for communicating, and we are not supposed to think of them as a thing. And he says that if we do not understand what is empty, that is, that it is not a thing, then we will never understand what is a Tathagata. And the one who holds on to the empty as a thing will consider even the Tathagata as either existing or not existing. So what we are supposed to understand by Tathagata, Tathagata is empty, gone. That is, when empty ceases, actually that is what is Tathagata. And let us say that if we do not understand the empty, there is no chance that we will ever understand the Tathagata. When the empty, to quote him, when the empty in terms of self-nature, the thought of the Buddha exists or doesn't exist after death is not appropriate. So the Buddha is empty. And if we don't understand that the Buddha is empty, then there is no possibility that we will ever understand Tathagata, the Buddha, the empty, gone. And now he says that the nature of the universe is the same as the Tathagata. And what is Tathagata? Tathagata is empty, gone. So the universe is also something like that, because he says it is the same. So about that, he says, whatever is the self-nature of Tathagata, that is also the self-nature of the universe. The Tathagata is devoid of self-nature. The universe is also devoid of self-nature. So this is what he is trying to say. That is, Tathagata is empty, not there. But we haven't yet exactly understood what is empty, except that empty is not a thing, but it is still doesn't appear to be a negation. It is not nothing, because we do have something, whatever it is not nothing, it is something, and that something, whatever we have in hand, is what Nagarjuna calls as empty. Now, when the views end, as he said, we are going to end suffering. And that is what he says about the Buddha. And it is only at the end that he said, I reverently bow to Gautama, who out of compassion has taught the true doctrine in order to relinquish all views. So his doctrine, in other words, the Buddha's doctrine, is claimed by Nagarjuna to be about that which will relinquish all views. That is, in emptiness. Emptiness is not views. There is no views. Emptinesses are the name of not having views. So when is it possible? It is only possible through the empty. And he says so. Because of emptiness of all existence, where, to whom, which, and for what reason, views such as the eternal could occur. Because whenever emptiness is there, there will be no body and there is no thing. And if there is no body and there is no thing, then wherefrom there will be views. Now let us see that how actually, or how I see that Nagarjuna is trying to show that through empty, we can see the emptiness, because that is why dependent origination is there. That is why Buddha has been teaching through dependent origination. Whatever is dependent is empty, and empty will direct us to emptiness. That is why it is there. A thing, and whatever we find is dependently arisen according to Nagarjuna. That is, all that we have is dependently arisen, to quote him. A thing that is not dependently arisen is not evident. For that reason, a thing that is non-empty is not evident. In other words, whatever is evident, whatever we have, is dependent. And he has shown to us that whatever is dependent is not a thing, but it is empty. Now, to have a glimpse of what it is empty means. Now, Nagarjuna says that the Buddhas do not talk about the self. They do not talk about the self or the not self, but they talk about the concept of self. And the Buddhas have made known the conception of the self and taught the doctrine of no self. At the same time, they have not spoken of something as the self or as the no self. So they have not. So he's saying that the Buddhas did not talk about the self or the no self. They talked about the conception of the self. And we have seen that he has proved through that self is dependent. That he said that self is dependent on something and the something is dependent on self, if that is the case. And now he's saying that self is a concept and dependent is all we have. He seems to be saying that what we have in hand or what is dependent is nothing but a concept. And if we really go into whatever he has said, we will find that he has actually denied two things, self and the object. That is the subjective and the objective. And he also says that if we deny the subjective, we also deny the objective. And he says that if you have denied the subjective, then you will deny the objective, to quote him. When views pertaining to mine and I, whether they are associated with the internal or the external, have waned, then grasping comes to cease. With the waning of the grasping, there is waning of birth. On the waning of defilement of action, there is release. Defilement of action belongs to one who discriminates, and these in turn result from obsession. Obsession in turn ceases with the context of emptiness. So if we know that we are not a thing, that the self is not a thing, then automatically the objective also stops. And why do we say that the objective and the subjective are related? And we saw that seer and the object of seeing are related. That is, we cannot think of the seer without the object of seeing, or we cannot think of object of seeing without the seer. So if they are together, so when self is denied or self is considered as a concept, when it is denied as a thing and it is considered as a concept, then we are also supposed to consider that the object is also empty. And this is what he says, and that is why he says that we are not supposed to have any views about the objects also, and says that we are not supposed to consider it as empty, non-empty. It is neither empty as non-empty, nor either empty or not empty. And this is the reason he says that when we hold views about emptiness, we commit another kind of mistake. That is, now What is that? Or everything is empty, the self is empty, and the object that is related to the self is also empty. So everything is empty. But we also have seen that Nagarjuna is saying that it is the empty which directs towards emptiness. Now, what is this emptiness? Now, we have seen that he has denied association, he has denied a distinction, he has denied a time, he has denied arising, occurrence, or dissolution of the empty. So, if that is denied, then what is there? Then it will be non-association, non-discrimination, no time, no occurrence, and dissolution. So we can consider that this is emptiness. And this is what he considers the knowledge of this emptiness, if we can even use the orb at all, as wisdom. And it is this wisdom which is without association, because it is not of a thing. Emptiness is not a thing. And that is why he in fact says that we take mistake committing to another level when we start having views about emptiness. Emptiness is not a thing, and we are not supposed to have any views about emptiness. So emptiness is not a thing, and wisdom is that which is without any association. That is knowledge. Of course, it is not of a thing. Knowledge of emptiness. And as I say, if we can consider, if we can bring in the word of at all, so this is what is wisdom. And in fact, he says that it is without association. So just let me say about wisdom. He says, when the fully enlightened ones do not appear, on the waning of the disciples, the wisdom of the self-enlightened proceeds without association. So there are no things. It is not all but something. This is what, according to Nagarjuna, is wisdom. Now, Nagarjuna says that when in wisdom, one doesn't remain an agent, because there is no distinction of an action and an agent. So there is no agent. And when action is not there, definitely the whole life process is not going to be there. But at the same time, he also says that we are not supposed to consider that for us who haven't seen or who haven't come up with wisdom, haven't seen the non-discrimination, who haven't seen the non-association, who haven't seen eternality or atemporality, who hasn't seen the non-occurrence and the dissolution, for them, the practice will go on. Because it is only practice that we can destroy impressions, and the impressions, with the destruction of the impressions only, we will not hold any views, and there will be no angry ignorance, and there will be the cessation of suffering. And finally, to what we consider as freedom, that is what finally Nagarjuna, of course, tries to arrive at, as he claimed in the very beginning, that is, Buddha's aim has been to release us from suffering. Now, this freedom is said as unrelinquished, not reached, unannihilated, non-eternal, non-ceased, non-arising. And it is also non-existence and existence. In other words, the freedom that we talk about is not a thing. And we have seen that he did say that samsara and nirvana are indistinguishable. He says that life process and freedom cannot be distinguished. There is not a single thing that can distinguish the life process from freedom. They are not things. So we are not supposed to have any views about the life. We are not supposed to have any view about freedom. And finally, he says, that is, Buddha by himself never taught us about any object, because there are no things. So let me just conclude with a quote by Nagarjuna, which he claims to be Buddha's. The Buddha didn't teach the appeasement of all objects, the appeasement of obsession and auspicious as some thing to some one at some time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been It's been great listening to you. And there were over 100 people listening to you all the way last 1 hour. And in between, Professor R.C. Sinha, Chairman ICPR, joined for some time. I don't think he's still there, but he was there for some time. Plenty of questions. My God, I myself have so many, but I wouldn't do that because there are so many questions in the chat box also. We will open it up. And others also, those who want to raise particularly younger research scholars, we have got another 20 minutes. We've got 20 minutes to spare. 7:30 sharp, we will end this. So put your questions in the chat box. I'll read it for you, or you may also raise it for yourself. It's been as usual. It is a brilliant text, no doubt about it, Nagarjuna's text, and the kind of arguments that Nagarjuna put forth. I generally, in my classes, I say teachers are dependent on students and students depend on teachers. Both are non-entities. What would happen to our salaries? I'm more worried. That's an existential problem. Professor, welcome, Professor Millen. Millen joined. My God, there is some miscommunication, Professor. Unmute yourself. Yeah, so I mean, it's been the story. One small observation, and then I will leave it to other. There is Professor Santosh Kumar Paul. Professor was raising some questions in the chat box, and others also. So to start with, the one thing was that the whole notion of empty, shunya or shunyata, emptiness. Does it apply to anything transcendental in Nagarjuna's philosophy, or was he addressing the empirical self? Probably Santosh Kumarji's question is also on the same lines. Yeah, it's the denial of the empirical self and objects, or does it also point to denying anything transcendental?
Thank you, Professor Natharaju. I have been thinking about it, whether Nagarjuna actually denies or he doesn't deny. But what I find is that he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about anything transcendental, and probably he follows Buddha that way. And what he denies is definitely the empirical self, and not only self in the sense of the subjective self, he also denies the objective that is there, because he relates, and I do think that it is something which is true in all Indian traditions, that is the self cannot be thought without the object. So he denies that there is a self as an entity, but he didn't say that the self is not there at all. And that is what I have been actually trying to say, that when he says that it is empty, he's not saying that there is no self at all. There is a self, and that self is a concept of self. So he is not denying self as a concept, but he is denying self as a discrete entity. He is denying thinghood to the self. And what about the transcendental? He doesn't talk about it. So I will not say that he denies the transcendental self, and I would also not like to say that he does accept it on transcendental self. He himself has kept it in a let us say that he has not answered it, and probably he did not want to answer it because he himself has claimed that he wanted to go the Buddha's way.
Silence was the best option that Buddha took it, and that's a whole book of views. The whole Madhyamaka Karika and Vigraha Vyavartani is a whole book of views, and he wants us not to have views.
Okay. So far as I have understood, like Nagarjuna is saying, having view is to consider the concept as a thing. That is, if we understand the concept in its real nature, that is concept as a concept, then we are not going to have any view. But we the students of philosophy do have views even on the concepts. I think he was not taking that into consideration, and probably I felt very bad when I saw that he said that that those people who hold views about emptiness are incorrigible. I felt that I am the incorrigible ones because I'm holding views knowing that it is a concept. And because most of the time he was saying that we hold a concept only when we hold the views, only when we do consider it to be a thing. And he said that the people who hold views about emptiness are incorrigible, and we people who are students of philosophy are holding views about the concept, so we are the incorrigible ones.
No, maybe for the sake of communication, probably we do hold on to that. Somewhere that kind of in Vigraha Vyavartani also, he says that he holds on to concepts, he holds on to views so that people can communicate things, you know.
No, he said that we have to believe in concepts, but we have to know them as concepts and use it, because that is what he said. That is, they are for communicating. They are for communicating the emptiness and communicating amongst ourselves. So communication is the purpose, and we should understand that the concepts are for communicating. We are not supposed to think the concepts to be thing and hold views. We can use as a for communication. And I don't know what you people say, but I did really feel very sad when I saw that we are the incorrigible as far as my understanding goes.
Professor Santosh Kumar Palji, sir, you're there? Professor Santosh Kumarji, you had something to say. Then we'll come to you, Professor Milan.
Okay. Because I would like to know what time you started.
Hello?
So we started at 6 only. We started at 6.
In the message which I got here, it's 7:30. I was waiting for 7:30. I was on at 6 o'clock. I was all this while I have been waiting for 7:30.
I'm so sorry. No, it says 6 to 7:30. That's 6 missed. 6 to 7:30.
Oh my God! I saw the last one.
Yeah.
6 to 7:30. My God, I'm very sorry because I was waiting since yesterday. I tried to enter into this thing by 6 o'clock, but nobody was online. That's why I was. Anyway,
it's only a
I'm
few
very
minutes
sorry.
before 6 that I just
I'm very sorry. I would like to apologize to Madam and to Professor Nataraju, because I was very interested when I've been waiting. I misunderstood the whole thing, the timing part.
Hello, ma'am.
Anyway.
Hello.
Yeah, Professor, go ahead. Santosh Kumarji, please.
Yes. Actually, I was listening to it very, very interestingly, but I am not a man of so-called Indian philosophy. I am in the Western front, I can say. Still, it seems that it is a philosophy of being, like that of process, metaphysics, etc. So, if we say that from the epistemological standpoint, dependence and so many things are there. But if you consider it in the ontological standpoint, then we have to remain silent, and that means it is empty. Am I correct in understanding this, Madam?
Thank you, sir. No, so long as we have to. Okay, we'll come to the silence later, but first he says that it is the empty which makes a communication possible. That is, whatever we have in hand, that is what is called the empty. Because it is dependent, that is why he refuses to give it the status of a discrete entity. So it is just that it is not a discrete entity, but still we do have something. And when we have something, that something is what he calls empty. And we just get a glimpse of what he understands by empty when he says that the Buddhas taught the concept of self, but they did not teach a self. So in other words, when he says that they were teaching the concept of self. So we can understand that empty, he takes it in the sense of a concept and not in the sense of a thing. And he was in fact denying that it is a thing. So empty is a concept. So and empty is definitely, the concept is definitely being used to communicate only. It is for communication amongst ourselves, among those who are empty, and it is also for communicating the emptiness.
Then it can be called epistemological. It's epistemology. It's a communication is a part of epistemology, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I would like to intervene here. Nagarjuna rejected the substantial worldview and any kind of, he's a skeptic. He's a skeptic, and there is the issue of relativist or absolute kind of skeptic. I believe that he's an absolute skeptic. So he will not talk about any kind of pramana or any kind of epistemological or logical kind of issues in the way in which just now Madam Sakuntala has just now explained. No definite articulation about anything ontologically or
admitting communication. So far as we are admitting communication.
No. That's what I'm going to say. That's what I'm going to come to that point. That is exactly what I'm going to come to point. Communication is there. The word emptiness, sunyata, is used because it's a necessary evil, not as a concept. He himself has clarified, Nagarjuna. He was very much aware. He anticipated all these criticisms. He rejected the whole idea about emptiness as a concept. It was a necessary evil. As I said, he was using negative reasoning. In that, he does his reasoning in such a way that the entire kind of appearance to be logical or epistemological kind of thinking, that itself will be self-destroyed. His argument, his reasoning, his negative reasoning is a self-destructive kind of reasoning which ends with pragmatism. And that has to be explained in a different way. His conception of nirvana, then Pratityasamutpada, everything, nirvana should be explained from the way in which pragmatism, once again, is not a theory again. Pragmatism is a word.
Pragmatism also is a kind of epistemology.
It's a theory. That is from our perspective, from his perspective. It was nothing like that because we are belonging to the 21st century. So from our perspective, we say like that. From his perspective, he anticipated that he was not talking about any kind of theory, any kind of concept or something like that.
No,
that
Professor Milan, what Professor Santosh Kumarji is saying and what I am also trying to say is Nagarjuna was not denying things, not denying self at an epistemic level in the sense that there are objects, there is a world out there, there is a self that is dealing with the world. That much of concession is there. Ontologically, maybe the reality is not there. Ontologically, there is that shunya. But at an epistemic level, we are dealing with it.
No, he was only saying that we should not conceptualize.
On the practical plane, we have to admit all this.
Yeah. On the practical plane, just now Madam has explained, on the practical plane, conventional self he accepts, not in the substantial sense.
Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may just, because I have been seeing that there are some questions on the chat box about the ultimate reality and that if emptiness is a concept. So Soumya basically is asking, and another one, I think Manoj Karka was also referring to it. I just would like to say something on the ultimate reality. Am I permitted, Dr. Nataraju?
Yeah, please. I mean, please, if you can also read out a question and answer it, or brief, make it brief so that you can answer more.
Yeah, and basically these are questions about the ultimate reality and the emptiness. So just let me say that when Nagarjuna talked about emptiness, he does mention it to be the ultimate truth, but I don't see it that he has said it to be the reality. Because he said that emptiness is also dependent on dependent origination, because he said that the ultimate truth has to be taught through dependent origination. So when you are teaching something with depending on something else, then you cannot consider it to be independent in that sense. So even that emptiness, he has referred to it that way. And emptiness also, let us say, when we are talking about it, definitely we are using it as a concept, but definitely emptiness is not a concept, not even a concept. And that is what he said, that when we talk about Tathagata, that one who has not understood empty will never understand Tathagata, because it is the ending of even the concept, that when the concept disappears or concept is no more there, then that is what we have as we Tathagata. The Buddha is a concept, but Tathagata is not a concept. And that is what he was trying to indicate to us as emptiness, that it is non-discrimination, it is non-associated and others. And let us say that about wisdom, actually, it is what it appears that is considered to be reality by Nagarjuna. At the very beginning, I said that wisdom is something which is not dependent, not associated. Reality is that not which is not associated, nothing about that we cannot use any positive term for it. And when it talked about wisdom, he specifically said that it is that which is without any association. So it appears that when he talked about reality, and the term that he used when he talked about wisdom is about that. That is, wisdom seems to be the reality. So the emptiness, we do talk about it, that emptiness, and moreover, it is not a thing. It is not something which you can catch hold of. And that is what he was so hard at trying to tell us. And that is why he brought up what we have as a concept, of course, Tathagata. That is, Buddha is a concept. But when Buddha is seized, then Tathagata is. Now, we cannot talk about that Tathagata. Tathagata is not even a concept. So emptiness is not even a concept. And that is why he said, that is, holding a view about emptiness is a taking or making mistake in another level. To think of a concept as a thing and having view, that is definitely a mistake. Now emptiness is not even a concept, and that we are considering, and then we are trying to develop a view about emptiness, then we are taking mistake, committing to another level. I hope that's so clear.
Professor, then can we not apply emptiness to concepts also? Concepts are human constructions depending on so many things. Each concept depends on so many factors, and conceptual, no concept can then have any existence at all. Therefore, that is also empty. All concepts are empty. How do you look at this?
So he doesn't say that he makes a difference between empty and emptiness. So here I'm talking about emptiness and not about empty. He says that empty is there because whatever is dependent is empty. He's not denying that empty is not there. But can we use the term existence and non-existence to empty? No, definitely not, because we do not, when we talk about even in we do not say that a golden mountain exists or a golden mountain doesn't exist, because Golden Mountain, if it is a concept, then we do not use the term of existence and non-existence to it. Similarly, when we talk about everything as a concept, we are not supposed to use use existence and non-existence to it. Emptiness is not identical with empty. Emptiness is indicated by empty. So empty is a concept, and what does it indicate? It indicates that what we find, because we have said through my paper, I have been saying that there cannot be association of the empty, there cannot be occurrence and let us say destruction of the empty, there cannot be a distinction of the empty, and time cannot apply to it. So if this is what empty cannot be, then this must be what emptiness is. But Nagarjuna definitely doesn't say, and he cannot say, because that which is not there in the sense of an existent, you cannot talk about it. We can start talking about a concept, but emptiness is not even a concept in that sense. And that is why he makes a reference to Tathagata. Tathagata is not even a concept. The Buddha is a concept. Buddha is an empty. Buddha is the empty, but Tathagata is not even the empty. Similarly, empty means it's a concept. Emptiness is not even a concept. So how do we talk about that which is not even a concept? And that is why Mr. Committing goes to another is say that it is incorrigible. It is not even a concept. We are considering the concept to be a thing. Already we have committed a mistake. But when we are considering emptiness, which is not even a concept, as a Tathagata, then Nagarjuna says probably he doesn't know where we are placing ourselves.
Yeah. Anybody? Any other question? There is a question. Yeah, please.
Ma'am, I would like to ask, ma'am, my name is Rajan. I'm from Banaras Hindu University. I would like to know, ma'am, like being a philosophy student, I would like to associate a concept with emptiness. So my question is that, like, does we often translate emptiness as nihilism? So does this emptiness lead to moral and existential nihilism or not? My second question is that, suppose I record a video, can we use that thing as a reference or as a fact to propose that the world exists? Just like that G. Moore proposing the refutation of idealism, that this is my one hand and this is my second hand, therefore reality exists. So can we use the realistic argument as a proposal for the existence of the world? These are my two questions, ma'am.
Hello, Raja. Nice to see you. I will answer your second question first. That is, he is not saying that your right hand and your left hand doesn't exist in the sense in which we understand. He is only saying that one cannot be understood without the other. Therefore, he says that do not consider it to be a discrete entity. And later he said that is, we cannot, if we cannot understand anything as a discrete, then why are you saying that it is a thing? Because it is only actually the concepts which are always related to one another. This is what he is trying to say. So whatever, say we are saying that it is a cause and we are saying that it is an effect, but we cannot ourselves distinguish what is a cause and what is an effect. And what are we saying? So this is, he is saying that the things that we cannot find in this universe as a distinct is not to be considered as distinct. And those are things which we cannot conceptually separate are not to be thought as distinct. This is what he is saying. And regarding your regarding your first question, which I think is quite important, that is whether we can have ethics in Nagarjuna's view. And towards the end, that is what I actually pointed out. He said that as long as you do not have the wisdom, as long as you are not, one has not, there is no more one, of course, as long as there is no realization of the emptiness, the question of ethics goes on. Because for the people who have said that, yeah, can you see me, Steve?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So as long as there is no realization of the emptiness, ethics has to go on, because without the practices, there cannot be an end to the impressions. So it is not for you and for me that ethics ends. It is for only the wise people that ethics, it doesn't have any meaning. And intellectual understanding of emptiness is not what he talked about. It has to be experienced. That is, we have to really feel what is empty, and empty will direct us to emptiness. Nataraju, you can't be heard. Your microphone is off.
Can you see a question in the chat box? Kanchana Gokte or somebody asked a question. No, somebody is presenting. Actually, somebody has to switch off. Somebody switched on the presentation button. No. Grassy Fadal is actually switched on the presenting button that somebody has to switch off. Okay, please, can you see that one more in the chat box?
I see so many questions. I don't know which one exactly. One is Namrata P. Is that one you were saying?
1 second, I'm reading. Two questions. J. Krishnamurti comes closest to Nagarjuna when he says life is a movement in relationship. Does it imply that our existence can be understood in relation to something? J. Krishnamurti, she wants to bring in J. Krishnamurti and say that he says life is in relationship, a movement in relationship. Does it imply that our existence can be understood in relation to something or not? Please explain Nagarjuna's Sunyata. how much is it based on Buddha's original teachings, and do they take a departure from it? Is it Nagarjuna's construction, or has it got any connection with Buddha's teaching? Yeah, please.
First, let me talk about Krishnamurti and Nagarjuna. Then I will come to Buddha and Nagarjuna. That is when Krishnamurti says that. When Krishnamurti says that all we have is a relationship, but at the same time, he also says that when we realize the self, when we really look into ourselves, when we have self-knowledge, it leads us to the no-thingness. That is, the self is not a thing. And this no-thingness, he joins it up and says that it is nothingness. That is also, he says, being alone, that is all one. That is, there is no distinction. So, and when Nagarjuna is saying about he doesn't use the word relationship. He says that everything is dependent. That is, all that we find in this universe is only dependent. That is only the related. So we can talk about only the related. And Krishnamurti also says that you can have only relations, but Nagarjuna will never talk about relationship as such, because if you bring in relationship, then you will also have to bring in something distinct. He doesn't want to refer to the distinct. Krishnamurti also doesn't actually make a reference to the distinct, but he does use the word relationship. And if you really go into Krishnamurti, then you will find that by relationship, he simply understands the responses to life. That is, any movement in life is actually called a relationship by Krishnamurti. I cannot quote him now, but he says that relationship is the response to life. In other words, that is, the movement in the life is itself called a relationship. Relationship is not to be understood as a relationship of discrete entities. And in Nagarjuna also, there cannot be relationship because there is no discrete entities. I do not find much difference between Krishnamurti and Nagarjuna. And if you ask me, I will say that Krishnamurti is a modern Nagarjuna. And regarding the second question that Nataraju has said that about Buddha and Nagarjuna, in fact, I do find that early Buddhism or Buddha's Buddhism is very much similar to what we have in Nagarjuna. Because when we have even Eightfold Path, what Buddha was actually concentrating was, he was trying to say that do not believe in a self. That is, the middle path is not to have an inclination to ourselves. We take right view, we take a I've forgotten the Astanga actually, but any right effort, all they were directing us not to take a position. So Buddha was asking us not to take a position, and Nagarjuna is also asking us not to take a position. Maybe it has become different with time, maybe 600 years apart. Nagarjuna made it Pratityasamutpada, but they are not talking about two different things. And even like Buddha was concentrating only on that. That is, do not consider anything to be a thing, because the moment you consider it to be a thing, you will get inclined. Don't get inclined. And Nagarjuna also says the same thing, don't get inclined. Both of them are talking about positionlessness.
Okay, we'll take a couple of very short questions so that, because we already overshot time, anybody? Professor Chandrasekhar, you're there? Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, it was a very good presentation, madam. I really enjoyed the whole thing. In fact, 3 clarifications, of which first I think I got a little bit clarified when Nataraju and Milan were discussing. The first one is regarding the 2 truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. Can I understand it as Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta? Though Nagarjuna might not talk like that, but then can I understand this conventional truth as part of the Vyavaharika and the nothingness as part of Paramarthika, number 1. Second question, I don't know whether I'm right in it. You mentioned in your course of lecture about action is imperishable according to Buddha. If action is imperishable according to Buddha, what about the person who is involved in the act? And what about the act? If that is imperishable, what about the person? Number 2. Number 3 is regarding your observation, namely nothing is not in terms of something that turned into nothing? Is it Atyanta Bhava, absolute non-existence? These are three questions I had just for clarification. Thank you so much, madam. Thank you, Nataraj.
Thank you, sir. It is nice to see you. Really, really good to see you. The first question, and actually yes, the two truths, and in fact, I began with, when I began my lecture, that is what I was saying, that is the ultimate truth is the emptiness and the dependent origination, the vyavahar is the conventional and it is the vyavaharika. And he is trying to say that, and this is what I have understood, that it is only through the vyavaharika, that it is only through the dependent that we can reach the emptiness. And I try to show in my whole paper by saying that dependent origination is about the dependent, which is a convention. And it is the convention, by being a convention only showing towards emptiness, that is the ultimate. Because convention is to be understood as a mere convention and is not to be understood as a discrete entity. So by being a convention, and that is the usefulness of a convention, and that is why it is the middle road. That is, a convention is a convention, and he is asking us to understand this convention as merely convention and not as something more than that, and not more than that. That is what is emptiness. That is, it is pointing that please do not understand it as more than that, and what it is, that it is not a thing, that it is pointing towards that. But I wouldn't exactly say what exactly emptiness is, because it is not a thing, as Nagarjuna has said. It is non-discriminated. That is, concepts cannot be discriminated because concepts are concepts. Only thing can be discriminated. So it is pointing towards that, which is not discriminated. And second one, sir, third one, let me come to it. That is, you was talking about abhava. Now, Nagarjuna will never talk about abhava because he says that the question of abhava comes when there is a bhava. And he refuses to accept that there is a bhava. Dependent is not a bhava. Dependent is empty. And empty is not a bhava. And this is what his whole Mula Madhyamaka Karika is about. Dependent is not to be considered as a bhava. Dependent is dependent. And towards the end only, I say that probably we are supposed to understand it because he said that self is dependent and self is a concept. So empty is nothing. The very meaning of empty is a concept. But that is what he was trying to say. That please do not understand that it is, the question is not about abhava, because abhava arises when there is a bhava. But where is the question of empty being abhava? Empty is not a thing. Empty is not a bhava. So the question of abhava doesn't arise. And there cannot be a distinction where there are no things. Where there are no things, how will you distinguish between one kind of abhava and the other kind of abhava? So he says that there is no distinction among the empties. Empties are empties. So if they are empties, then you cannot have a question of distinction among the empties. Question of distinction arises only where there is a question of a thing. Sir, I just right now I don't remember your second question. If I can have it again.
Yeah, please. That is, you spoke about action is imperishable according to Buddha.
Right, sir.
What about the person who acts?
Yeah. So first thing is imperishability was admitted by Buddha, but Nagarjuna has interpreted in his own way. He said that to be imperishable is not to have an end. And he said that not to have an end means not to have a beginning. In other words, he said that is there is no beginning and there is no end. And he wants to take us again to that thing that action is a concept. Action is not an entity. So he wants to convey that it is a concept. And you were asking, sir, that what about the agent? And that is what he had been saying at the very beginning. He said that action and agent conceptually cannot be separated. And if they cannot be conceptually separated, they are dependent. And if they are dependent, then they are concept. So if we understand imperishability of action, we also understand the imperishability of the agent. But imperishability has been interpreted in a different way by Nagarjuna by saying that imperishability means atemporality, that is, end cannot be applied to it, beginning cannot be applied to it, because it's a concept. Concept doesn't have a beginning and concept doesn't have an end.
But how to have a concept when there is nothing, when it's empty? How can I conceive?
Okay, so
Isn't it again emptiness? Please.
So, like, in fact, that was a question that always used to come to my mind, that what is the concept of? That is, if there is there something which is conceived, and that is why it is concept. But now for Nagarjuna, when he said it is vikalpa, he said it is kalpana matra. It doesn't have to be a concept of. And I think this is the ground on which Shankara actually criticized him. But Nagarjuna says that it doesn't have to be a concept of, and that is why vikalpa is said to be kalpana matra. It's an imagination. That is that it is actually, he doesn't deny that they are not there. He's saying that they are there, but they are to be understood in their respective status. That is, we are supposed to understand that they are not things. Basically, I feel that Nagarjuna is pointing towards the thing that they are not the things. That is, their status is not to be considered as a discrete entity.
Thank you. It's up to you, Nataraj now.
Yeah, one last, if anybody has a comment, otherwise we will stop it here. I can thank everybody. Yeah, it's good. We can keep discussing. We can keep discussing because it will continue. Yeah, there are Nayayikas, they have objections on Buddhist theories, and Vedantins, I didn't want to bring Vedanta, but Vedantins have their own criticism.
In fact, I want to bring intentionality also from phenomenological point of view. Okay.
No, not now.
Oh, yeah.
Not now. Now, Soumya probably wants to make a brief because,
Sir, if Madam
he's
permits.
for several decades. Yeah.
Yes, sir. A very brief.
Both the question and answer
I might have been annoyed.
both.
I mean, you.
No, Soumya, it was not audible clearly. There is some problem. Soumya, cross-check the mic.
Yeah, the point of my problem is Nagarjuna's trajectory from theory to practice. I mean, I have always felt Nagarjuna I've always thought Nagarjuna to be an armed logician, armed with his skeptic tool, that is Shunyata.
You are audible, but the sound is.
Hello. So, can you hear me, sir? Am I audible, sir?
Is your question
audible?
over?
Hello.
I heard your question, Soumya.
Hello. Am I audible? Hello, sir. Am I audible now? Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello.
Soumya, yes. Soumya, go ahead.
Yes. I have always considered Nagarjuna as a logician, as a thorough logician. So my question was about his trajectory from theory to practice. I mean, if he means emptiness as a product of this rational engagement, then what would be his the point of trajectory to the practicalness of this emptiness?
Thank you, Soumya. Nagarjuna himself never said that he wanted to give us some theories. I don't see actually. His theory is a byproduct of his activity. If you really look into all his books, you will find that he wants to place us in the middle position. It is not a path. It is a middle position, which is actually no position. It's an activity. It is not only what he is doing. He is also trying to place us in that middle position of no positionlessness, wherefrom we will not be having any view. So I don't see him as a theorist. I don't see him as providing any theory. And at the same time, you were asking about the emptiness. Emptiness is not a product. Emptiness is something. It's not. Let us say that we cannot even use the word is, because is means that the thing is. Emptiness is not a thing, but emptiness is not a product. It is not that something you. It is only that you come upon it. Wisdom doesn't mean that the thing has come into being, if we can use the word thing, but of course emptiness is not a thing. So knowledge simply means a realization. And here also wisdom means simply the realization of emptiness. The question of emptiness coming into being doesn't arise with regard to Nagarjuna. He never says it comes into being. It is not something that even for you to realize at the end of a road, there is no road for Nagarjuna. For Nagarjuna, every state, the moment we realize that it is dependent, that it is empty, that empty is going to direct us to emptiness. So we don't have to cross a road. We just have to stand in this state. Madhyama Pratipad is not a path. Madhyama Pratipad is a state. If we can even use the word state, it is not no position. It is no position. It is positionlessness. I hope I have made myself clear, Soumya.
Yeah. So, Professor Millen, you have one last comment, or shall I thank everybody? Anybody else? Yeah, good.
I can only thank Professor Natarajan and Professor Madam Sakuntala for, because this is something. Nagarjuna, one person with whom I was also trying to link up with Jiddu Krishnamurti, and the whole thing we have to understand all that Nagarjuna is a paradigm shift. Many of the things which we use in traditional Indian philosophy or Western philosophy cannot be applied to him. His very position is to deconstruct the entire available worldview based on substantial kind of thinking, and Sakuntala beautifully stated, we cannot start as if Nagarjuna was speaking about some theory and coming to practice. I'm referring to Soumya. That approach is, I don't think that is appropriate, because Nagarjuna cannot be placed within that kind of traditional, conventional philosophical mold. His whole purpose was, as I said a short while ago, he used logic not, he used ontology in a different sense, in a negative way, only to deconstruct. And with that practical life, which is non-conceptualized, pure sensum. Kalpana is a kalpana apodha. That kind of sensum, sense experience, which is associated with any kind of speculative philosophical thinking, whether on the logical plane or on the ontological plane, just taking life, the world, as it is experienced without any conceptualization. That is exactly the whole point. Once we remember the thing, everything will be okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor Nataraju.
Oh, Lakshmikantji, yeah, you are there.
This is Lakshmikant.
Please go ahead. Yeah,
hello, Lakshmikant.
I was listening very carefully. Milanji, Professor Milanji, thank you. I was listening to the lecture in the middle actually, and Sakuntalaji, Professor Sakuntalaji talked about a lot of things about Madhyam Pratipad. So that's why I entered to the lecture in Madhyama. In the middle of the lecture, I entered. That's why, but I enjoyed a lot. And thank you, Natarajuji. The question and answer session is very beautiful. That is the most attractive point of a lecture. This means that people have understood your lecture so clearly. Vade yayate tattvabodha. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining, Professor. I thank the sponsors of this lecture, Indian Council of Philosophical Research. The chairman joined the lecture for some time, for a few minutes. He was there. Professor Sinha was there. And then Professor Millen and Dr. Arup and other research scholars have joined from different parts of India. It was around 100 people all the way. 100 people were listening to this talk and the discussions thereafter. We can continue the discussions in future also. We have another ICPR sponsored seminar, which we are not able to hold because of the pandemic. We have that seminar on philosophy and the method. We can again probably bring Nagarjuna and his dialectical method. and of course other methodologies. We will discuss more onto the methodologies and how the problems of philosophy that we are dealing with these days and how we should take forward the philosophy. Professor Milan is disappointed with the way philosophy is undertaken in India these days, and let's discuss as to what kind of problems we need to discuss in the next coming couple of decades and what kind of methodologies we can apply. Can we modify some of the existing methods? Can we come up with something new? And then what kind of problems of philosophy, particularly vis-a-vis in the context of Indian philosophy? We'll have elaborate 3-day seminar. Maybe you all can come down here once the pandemic comes down. In the middle of the pandemic, undertaking such exercises this is our dharma, this is swabhava. There is no shunyata for a Vedantin, there is a swabhava, and we hold on to a substantialist view of everything. Everything exists, it has existence. And the world that I see has existence, maybe for the time being. And our swabhava is that we hold on to such discussions. We do undertake such deliberations. It inspires us to actually relook at what we are doing more seriously. It inspires us to do more good work. And particularly younger scholars today, probably 50-60 research scholars have joined from different parts of India. It's very encouraging today, maybe first time in last 1.5 years of digital platform that it touched 130, 140. So that's a good number, very encouraging. And so many young scholars are looking forward to doing better research. So it's up to Professor Milan and other professors here. I'm not dissatisfied with the way philosophy is done, but how to improvise, what more new methodologies of doing philosophy, what kind of philosophical problems we can take up so that the research is taken forward in the academic department. That's our responsibility. So the batch continues. The core of, when I conduct the seminars or talks, the core remains the same. Those few people always remain the same because these discussions we can take forward. And then we can add more people. You can join our Friday reading session sometimes. I'll send the links for all of you. Many of you here, young research scholars. Every Friday we have a reading session, evening 6 o'clock to 7:30. So those reading, we read from the text straight away, and without much interpretation or questioning. It's the sheer reading of the textbooks. You can also join. We will join some of you there. Thank you, everybody. And last, it is thanking Dr. Shakuntala for taking time out there and then, being with us today, spending time for 1.5 hours, and then deliberating on Nagarjuna, Shunyata, and Pratityasamutpada. Thank you so much. So, thanking ICPR and everybody. Thank you very much. And take care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay away from Corona. We need to do more in philosophy. We already lost Professor Vedaparayana. When Krishnamurti's name comes, Nagarjuna's name comes, it is Professor Vedaparayana, remember. And very unfortunately, we pray that, his soul rests in peace. Whether if there is anything called as a soul, let it rest in peace. For a Vedantin, there is transmigration, there is a substantial self. And I pray for his, and also our deep condolences to the family. Mrs. Vedaparayana called me to just convey this, so that all of us come to know. He was a wonderful scholar, and we missed out on him. And let's hope that all of you take care of yourself. Indian philosophy needs to be taken forward by all of you, by the younger generation, by the younger scholars. I hope to see you in the future talks and seminars. Shall I say namaskaraha, punah milishyamaha. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lakshmikanji, thank you.
Ji, thank you. Thank you.